Mafia boss had every woman, but he fell for the only one who wanted to kill him. Before we dive into the story, tell me where in the world you're watching from, and if this story steals your heart, please hit subscribe. The neon sign of Il Serpent flickered against the rain-slicked cobblestones of Rome's backstreets, casting intermittent crimson shadows that danced like devils in the dark. Inside the subterranean club, the air was thick with the cloying sense of expensive cigar smoke, aged leather, and the metallic tang of adrenaline. Dominic Morty sat at the high-stakes poker table, his presence dominating the room more effectively than any weapon. He was a man carved from granite and shadow, his tailored black suit fitting his broad shoulders perfectly, his olive skin tight over high cheekbones. A faint white scar traced the line of his jaw, a permanent reminder that in his world, beauty was always marred by violence. His dark eyes, usually devoid of emotion, scanned the room with the predatory indifference of a lion observing grazing gazelles. He was the don of the most powerful syndicate in Italy, a man who had everything: wealth beyond measure, power that bent politicians to his will, and women who would sell their souls for a moment of his attention. Yet he sat alone in a crowded room, eternally watchful. Perched on a mezzanine balcony overlooking the gambling floor, Arya Vane observed him through the scope of her mind's eye, though her physical weapons were concealed beneath a sleek silk jacket. She was a ghost in the machine of the criminal underworld, an assassin whose reputation for flawless execution was whispered only in the deepest recesses of the dark web. Her striking gray eyes, cold as a winter sea, assessed Dominic not as a man, but as a target package: drag factor, windage, elevation. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe, practical knot, revealing the graceful curve of a neck that housed a spine of steel. She had been sent by the Russo family, Dominic's bitterest rivals, with a simple directive: end the Morty reign tonight. The leverage they held over her, the life of her younger brother, ensured her absolute compliance. Arya adjusted her position, her movements precise and deliberate, the mark of someone who had killed before and would kill again. She was calculating the exit strategy when the variables changed abruptly. 4 men, reeking of cheap bourbon and nervous sweat, burst through the service entrance near Dominic's table. They were amateurs, loud and clumsy, guns drawn with shaking hands. It was a hit, but not hers. It was messy, unrefined, and doomed to failure, but it threatened to ruin her carefully laid plans by putting Dominic on high alert. Dominic's personal security detail was slow to react, hindered by the crowd and their own complacency. Dominic himself, however, moved with startling speed, overturning the heavy oak table to create a temporary shield as the first shots rang out, shattering whiskey glasses and sending patrons screaming for cover. Arya didn't think. She reverted to training. If these idiots killed him, she couldn't confirm the kill to the Russos according to their strict protocol. If they wounded him, he would go underground, becoming an impossible target. She needed him alive, right up until the moment she decided he should die. She vaulted over the balcony railing, dropping 20 feet to the casino floor with the silent grace of a panther, absorbing the impact in a combat roll that brought her up right behind the rearmost attacker. Before the man realized she was there, she drove a crystalline stiletto into the base of his skull, severing the brain stem instantly. He collapsed without a sound. The remaining 3 were focused on Dominic's makeshift barricade. Arya drew the suppressed Glock 19 from the holster at the small of her back. 2 shots, double-tapped with rhythmic perfection, took the second and third men in their abrasive vests, dropping them where they stood. The final gunman turned, eyes wide with panic as he faced the woman in black who had materialized from the chaos. He raised his weapon, but Arya was faster. She closed the distance, deflection his gun arm upward with a shattering crack of bone, and drove her knee into his midsection. As he doubled over, she finished it with a precise strike to his trachea. Silence fell over the club, heavier than the gunfire had been. It had taken less than 10 seconds. Arya stood amidst the carnage, her breathing even, her gray eyes scanning the periphery for further threats. She holstered her weapon smoothly, then turned to face the man she had just saved, the man she was sworn to kill. Dominic emerged from behind the overturned table. He stepped over the debris and the bodies of his would-be assassins, his expression unreadable, though a flicker of dangerous interest ignited in his dark eyes. He looked at his own security guards, who were finally rushing forward, with profound disappointment, then turned his full attention to the woman standing amidst the ruin. "Impressive," Dominic said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the tense air. He stopped 3 feet from her, close enough to perceive the faint, cold scent of her perfume beneath the cordite. "You're not one of mine, and you're certainly not one of theirs." He gestured dismissively at the corpses on the floor. Arya met his gaze head-on, refusing to flinch under the intensity that made lesser men crumble. This was the critical juncture, the moment where the lie had to take root. No, they were sloppy, amateurs. "And what are you?" Dominic asked, his eyes narrowing as he assessed her athletic build, the deadly economy of her movement. "Available," Arya replied smoothly. "My name is Arya Rossi. I'm a private security contractor operating independently. I was here meeting a potential client who decided to bolt when the shooting started." Dominic stepped closer, invading her personal space, testing her reactions. She didn't budge. "A contractor who drops 4 armed men in as many seconds without breaking a sweat. You're overqualified for babysitting nervous businessmen, Miss Rossi." "I prefer high-risk environments," she lied, the falsehood tasting like ash on her tongue. "They pay better." Dominic surveyed the room, the incompetence of his own men glaringly obvious against her lethal efficiency. He needed someone like her, someone operating outside the compromised loyalties of the Roman families. The irony of the situation was lost on him, that the most dangerous person in the room was the one offering assistance. "You're hired," Dominic said abruptly. He didn't ask for references, the 4 dead men at her feet were resume enough. "My current head of security is apparently obsolete. You'll report directly to me, starting now." Arya allowed a small, cool smile to touch her lips. The wolf had just invited the viper into his den. "As you wish, Mr. Morty." As they exited the club, flanked by his remaining guards, Dominic placed a large, warm hand on the small of her back to guide her toward his waiting armored limousine. The contact sent a jolt of unexpected electricity through her, a dangerous friction between hunter and prey. She was close now, closer than any assassin had ever gotten. But as she slid into the leather interior of his car, entering his world, she realized the hardest part wasn't going to be getting close enough to kill him. It was going to be resisting the magnetic pull of the man, whose life she held in her hands. The Morty Villa sat atop the Janiculum Hill, a sprawling estate of white marble and classical columns that gazed down upon the ancient sprawl of Rome like an indifferent god. It was a fortress disguised as a palace, equipped with state-of-the-art surveillance, reinforced walls, and a small army of guards patrolling the perimeter. Yet, to Arya, now embedded within its opulent halls, it felt less like a sanctuary and more like a gilded cage designed to contain a very dangerous beast. 3 weeks had passed since the incident at Il Serpent. Arya had integrated herself seamlessly into Dominic's inner circle, replacing his former head of security with terrifying efficiency. She reorganized his protection protocols, identified weak points in his travel routes, and commanded his men with an icy competence that brooked no dissent. She was the perfect shield, a fact that constantly warred with her true purpose as the ultimate sword. Dominic watched her constantly. He was a man used to possessing everything within his sphere of influence, yet Arya remained frustratingly out of reach. She was professional to the point of robotic, her gray eyes deflecting his attempts at personal conversation like armor plating. She didn't flirt, she didn't cower, and she didn't seem impressed by the staggering wealth that surrounded him. It infuriated him, and it fascinated him. One evening, in the cavernous library that smelled of old paper and expensive brandy, Dominic decided to push harder. He was seated behind an enormous mahogany desk, reviewing ledgers that detailed both legitimate shipping manifests and less savory imports. Arya stood by the fireplace, her presence a silent, watchful shadow. "You're too quiet, Arya," Dominic said, not looking up from the papers. "It makes people nervous." "My job isn't to make people comfortable, Mr. Morty. It's to keep them alive," she replied, her voice an even monotone. Dominic looked up then, leaning back in his chair, the leather creaking beneath his shifting weight. His dark eyes traced the lines of her tailored suit, acknowledging the lethal grace concealed beneath the fabric. Dominic! I've told you to call me Dominic when we are alone. Professional boundaries are important for maintaining focus, sir. He stood up, moving around the desk with the stalking gait of a large predator. He approached her slowly, deliberately invading her personal space until he was close enough to see the flecks of darker charcoal in her gray eyes. Boundaries are meant to be tested. You live in my house, you eat at my table, you hold my life in your hands every day. I think we're past formalities. Arya held her ground, though her heart rate accelerated traitorously. His proximity was overwhelming. He radiated a raw, masculine power that was difficult to ignore. He smelled of sandalwood and something darker, sharper, the scent of a man who walked with violence daily. "What do you want to know, Dominic?" she asked, yielding slightly on the name to maintain the larger deception. "Everything," he murmured, reaching out a hand to brush a stray lock of blonde hair from her cheek. His touch was surprisingly gentle, a stark contrast to the brutality she knew he was capable of. "I look at you, and I see a cipher, a beautiful, deadly weapon with no history. History is a liability in this line of work." "Or perhaps," Dominic said, his voice dropping to a husky whisper, "you're hiding something. Everyone in this city is hiding something." Before she could formulate a defense, the heavy oak doors of the library burst open. Franco, one of Dominic's captains, rushed in, his face pale. "Boss, we have a problem. The shipment at the Civitavkia port. The revenue guard is tossing it." Dominic's expression instantly hardened into the ruthless mask of the dawn. The intimate moment vanished like smoke in a gale. "Get the car!" he barked at Arya, the seductive tension replaced by cold command. The drive to the port was a high-speed blur of rain-streaked highways. Arya drove with calculated aggression, weaving through traffic while Dominic worked his phone, barking orders to lawyers and fixers, mobilizing his network to contain the damage. She watched him in the rearview mirror, seeing the immense pressure he operated under. He wasn't just a thug skimming profits. He was the CEO of a massive, volatile corporation built on blood and shadow. He carried the weight of hundreds of families who depended on his organization for survival. When they arrived at the docks, the situation was chaotic. Flashing blue lights illuminated shipping containers stacked like industrial monoliths. Armed customs officers were arguing with Dominic's port crew. Dominic exited the car before it fully stopped, striding into the fray with an aura of absolute authority. Arya was instantly at his side, her hand hovering near her concealed weapon, her eyes scanning the rooftops and shadows for threats. A customs official, a nervous man named Rossi who was clearly out of his depth, tried to block Dominic's path. "Mr. Morty, this area is restricted during an ongoing investigation." Dominic towered over the official, his voice a low, terrifying growl. "Everything in this port is my concern, Rossi. You're interrupting legitimate commerce based on a false tip from my competitors." While Dominic verbally dismantled the official, Arya noticed movement between two containers 50 yards away. The glint of metal under a sodium streetlight. "Down!" she shouted, shoving Dominic violently to the wet asphalt just as a high-caliber rifle shot cracked through the air where his head had been a second before. Arya rolled over Dominic's prone form, shielding him with her own body, her gun already drawn and firing toward the muzzle flash in the distance. She provided suppressing fire while dragging Dominic behind the cover of a forklift. His guards returned fire, and the sniper, realizing the element of surprise was lost, retreated into the night. Breathing heavily, they lay tangled together on the cold, wet concrete behind the machinery. Dominic was beneath her, his dark eyes wide, staring up into hers. The adrenaline of the near miss coursed through them both, stripping away the professional veneer. "You saw him before I did," Dominic breathed, his hands gripping her waist, pulling her tighter against him rather than pushing her away. "It's my job," she whispered, her voice unsteady for the first time. "No," Dominic said fiercely, his gaze dropping to her lips. It's more than that with you. The danger, the proximity, the raw intensity of the moment, it was too much. Dominic surged upward, capturing her mouth with his in a kiss that was less about romance and more about the desperate affirmation of life in the face of death. It was hard, demanding, and overwhelming. For a split second, Arya yielded. She tasted the danger on his tongue, felt the iron strength of his arms around her, and a terrifying wave of desire crashed over her. She wanted this. She wanted him. Then the image of her brother, imprisoned in a Russo basement, flashed in her mind. She tore herself away, gasping, scrambling backward on the pavement. We need to move. They might have a secondary team. Dominic lay there for a moment, breathing hard, watching her retreat into professional mode. He wiped rain from his face, a strange look in his eyes, a mixture of frustration and a deepening, dangerous respect. He had tasted the fire beneath the ice, and he knew, with absolute certainty, that he would burn the world down to taste it again. Arya, however, knew that the fire she was playing with would ultimately consume them both. The air in the villa had changed since the night at the docks. The professional distance Arya desperately tried to maintain had been fractured, replaced by a thick, unspoken tension that simmered beneath every interaction. Dominic watched her with a possessive intensity that made her skin prickle, his eyes tracking her movements not just as a bodyguard, but as a woman he intended to claim. But the outside world was closing in. Arya received a burner phone message that morning, a single image of her younger brother, Leo, looking gaunt and terrified in a dimly lit room, holding a current newspaper. The text beneath it was succinct. Time is running out. Finish it. The Russo family was losing patience. The pressure was a physical weight in Arya's chest, a constant, sickening reminder of her true mission. Every day Dominic remained alive was another day Leo suffered. Yet, when she looked at the back of Dominic's neck during meetings, or the vulnerable hollow of his throat when he laughed, rare as it was, her hand hesitated on the imaginary trigger. Needing to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the villa, Dominic ordered the car brought around. "Drive," he told Arya, offering no destination. She drove for an hour, heading southeast out of Rome, into the rolling hills of the Caselli Romani. The urban sprawl gave way to ancient vineyards and olive groves. Dominic remained silent, brooding, pouring himself a glass of amber liquid from the car decanter. He finally directed her down a narrow cypress-lined driveway that led to a weathered, yet majestic stone estate surrounded by dormant grapevines. It felt older, more grounded than the marble showpiece in Rome. "This was my grandfather's house," Dominic said quietly as they exited the car. "The air here was cooler, smelling of rich earth and pine. Where I grew up before everything changed." He led her not into the house, but around to a small, wrought-iron enclosed family cemetery overlooking the valley. He stopped before two polished granite headstones bearing the names Alessandro and Isabella Morti, his parents. Arya stood a respectful distance away, watching the ruthless dawn of Rome shrink slightly, the weight of the past settling onto his broad shoulders. "They were killed in a car bombing 20 years ago," Dominic said, his voice devoid of inflection, which made the words even more chilling. "A rival faction decided the easiest way to take over was to decapitate the leadership. I was 18. My sister, Giulia, was 10. He reached up and absently traced the faint white scar on his jaw. "We were in the car behind them. The blast threw shrapnel everywhere. I shielded Giulia, got this for my trouble." He turned to look at Arya, his dark eyes stark and unguarded in a way she had never seen. "I sent her away to Switzerland the next day. She lives a normal life there. She doesn't know what I do to keep her safe, to keep this family standing. She thinks I'm just a very successful importer." Arya felt a crack form in the armor around her heart. This wasn't the narrative the Russos had fed her. They had painted Dominic as a power-hungry tyrant who reveled in violence. They hadn't mentioned the 18-year-old boy forced to become a monster to protect his baby sister. "Why are you telling me this?" Arya asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Because you look at me sometimes like you're trying to decide if I'm human," Dominic replied, stepping closer to her. The setting sun cast long shadows, bathing them in blood-orange light. I do terrible things, Arya. I order men to die. I ruin lives to protect my interests, but I don't enjoy it. It's the tax I pay for stability, for survival. He reached out, taking her hand. His skin was warm, calloused, real. I'm tired of the war. I want to legitimize the business. Move the family money entirely into legal holdings, step back from the streets. But the wolves, like the Russos, they smell blood in the water whenever I talk about peace. They mistake evolution for weakness. Arya looked down at their joined hands. The revelation staggered her. He wanted out, just like she did. He was trapped by his legacy, just as she was trapped by her love for her brother. You can't just walk away, Dominic, she said, the warning slipping out before she could stop it. The life doesn't let you go. I know, he said fiercely, pulling her slightly closer. But I need a reason to keep fighting until I can get out. I need something real in this world of lies. His thumb caressed her knuckles. I think I found it. His confession was a devastating blow to her resolve. She was standing over the graves of the parents whose murder had forged him, holding the hand of the man she was supposed to execute, listening to him confess that she was his hope for the future. The monstrous hypocrisy of her position overwhelmed her. The Russos were the true predators here, holding a teenage boy hostage to force her into murder. Dominic was just a man standing on a mountain of corpses he hadn't asked to build, trying not to drown in the blood. As the sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the vineyard into twilight, Arya realized with sickening clarity that she had lost the ability to complete her mission. She couldn't kill Dominic Morty. But as they walked back to the car in the gathering dark, the image of Leo's terrified face burned in her mind. If she didn't kill Dominic, the Russos would kill her brother. The wound in her own soul tore wide open. She was trapped between saving the innocent boy she adored and destroyed the complex, damaged man she was falling in love with, and time had just run out. The drive back to Rome was shrouded in a heavy, suffocating silence. The vulnerability Dominic had shown at the vineyard had shifted the tectonic plates of their relationship, creating a landscape that was terrifyingly new. He didn't touch her in the car, but his presence was a constant, heated pressure against her senses. When they arrived back at the villa, the tension didn't dissipate, it concentrated. Dominic didn't head to his study as he usually did. Instead, he turned to her in the cavernous marble foyer, his eyes dark with an unresolved storm. Come upstairs, he said. It wasn't an order to an employee. It was a raw plea from a man near his breaking point. Arya knew she should refuse. Every professional instinct screamed at her to retreat to her quarters, to pack her bag, to run. But her feet betrayed her, following him up the sweeping staircase to the master suite. His room was vast, dominated by a large bed and a balcony overlooking the city lights. Dominic walked to the balcony doors, staring out at the empire that was both his kingdom and his prison. He tore off his tie, throwing it onto a chair with frustration. They're going to make a move soon, he said, his back to her. The Russos. My intel says they're getting desperate. Arya's heart hammered against her ribs. She was the reason they were desperate. You need to increase security, she managed to say, her voice hollow. Dominic turned slowly. The moonlight catching his face highlighted the sharp planes of his cheekbones and the intense hunger in his eyes. I don't trust anyone right now, Arya, except you. The admission was a dagger in her gut. He closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. He didn't ask for permission this time. He reached out and cupped her face in his large hands, his thumbs tracing her cheekbones. Tell me to stop, he whispered roughly, his forehead resting against hers. Tell me you don't feel this pulling us apart. Arya couldn't lie, not about this. The war inside her was deafening, duty versus desire, fear versus love. She was drowning, and he was the only anchor in the storm. Don't stop, she breathed, the words of surrender. He kissed her then, a scorching, possessive collision that obliterated thought. It wasn't gentle. It was a desperate outpouring of everything they couldn't say, the violence of their worlds meeting in a clash of bodies. He lifted her onto the waist-high console table, her legs wrapping instinctively around him. Clothes were shed with frantic haste, buttons tearing, fabric ripping. Their making love was a battle, a furious exchange of power and need. Arya met his intensity match for match, her nails digging into his shoulders, grounding herself in the physical reality of him. For those moments, there were no rival families, no hostages, no contracts. There was only heat, friction, and the guttural sounds of two isolated souls finally connecting. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets of his massive bed, the room quiet except for their slowing breaths. Dominic held her tightly against his chest, his arm draped over her waist like a steel band. "I'm not letting you go, Arya," he murmured into her hair. "Whatever it is you're running from, whatever you're hiding, we'll deal with it. Together, you're mine now." It was a promise of protection, of loyalty, the highest currency in his world, and it terrified her more than his threats ever could. Because now, the price of betraying him was unbearable. She waited until his breathing deepened into sleep. Carefully, agonizingly slow, she untangled herself from his embrace. She slipped out of bed, gathering her torn clothes, her heart breaking with every silent step toward the door. She looked back at him one last time, his powerful form vulnerable in sleep, the scar on his jaw visible in the moonlight. "I have to save Leo," she thought desperately, "but I can't kill you." She needed to contact the Russos, to buy more time, maybe to try and negotiate a flip, offering them something else of value in exchange for her brother. It was a desperate, foolish plan, but it was all she had. She made it down to the study, needing a secure line that wasn't her monitored burner phone. She sat at Dominic's desk, her hands shaking as she reached for the encrypted laptop. As the screen flared to life, the study door opened. Dominic stood there, wrapped in a silk robe, his face a mask of cold, dawning fury. He wasn't asleep. He had never been asleep. In his hand, he held a manila folder. He threw it onto the desk in front of her. It slid across the mahogany surface, spilling photographs, grainy surveillance shots of her meeting with a Russo lieutenant 3 months ago, banking records linking her alias to shell companies owned by their syndicate. "I wanted it to be wrong," Dominic said, his voice deadly quiet, void of the warmth that had been there only an hour ago. "My analyst found the connection yesterday. I didn't want to believe it. I brought you to my parents' graves. I took you into my bed. I gave you every chance to tell me the truth." Arya stared at the photos, the blood draining from her face. The trap had sprung, but not the one she intended. "Dominic, please, let me explain," she begged, standing up, her hands held out in a placating gesture. "Explain what? That you're a Russo whore sent to put a bullet in my head." His eyes were black holes of betrayal. The pain in his voice was worse than his anger. "Was any of it real, Arya? Or was the fuck just part of the job?" "No, it was real. Dominic, they have my brother. They're going to kill him if I don't." Before she could finish, the night air outside was shattered by the thunderous roar of an explosion at the main gate, followed immediately by the relentless chatter of automatic gunfire. Alarm klaxons began to scream throughout the villa. Dominic grabbed a Sig Sauer from a hidden compartment in the desk, his eyes snapping toward the window. "Your friends are here early." He looked back at her, the weapon pointed squarely at her chest. The look of utter devastation on his face was horrifying. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't finish their job right now." The villa vibrated with the chaotic symphony of an assault. Glass shattered downstairs, and the heavy thud of boots on marble echoed up the stairwell. The Russos had sent a kill squad, tired of waiting for Arya, deciding to burn the whole structure down with everyone inside. Dominic's gun didn't waver from Arya's chest. His eyes were hard, the betrayal calcifying into murderous intent. "One reason," he repeated over the screaming alarms. "Because I didn't kill you when I had the chance," Arya yelled back, her voice raw with desperation and truth. "Every day for a month I could have ended you. Tonight, in your bed. I couldn't do it, Dominic, because I fell in love with the mark." The confession hung in the air between them, fragile yet undeniably powerful. The gunfire downstairs was getting closer. Dominic stared at her, a war raging behind his eyes. The man who demanded absolute loyalty was warring with the man who had felt her heart beating against his own. Another explosion rocked the villa, closer this time, a grenade in the foyer. If they get up here, we're both dead, Arya pressed, her gray eyes pleading. You know how I fight. You need me. She slowly reached for the spare Beretta he kept strapped beneath the desk. Dominic tensed, his finger tightening on the trigger of his cig. It was the ultimate gamble of trust. If you point that at me, Dominic growled, I won't hesitate. I won't, Arya vowed. She gripped the Beretta, racking the slide with a metallic snap that sounded like a promise. She moved to his side, facing the study door, putting herself between him and the coming threat. Dominic let out a ragged breath, lowering his weapon slightly. The alliance was formed, fragile as spun glass, forged only by the imminent necessity of survival. Hallway, Dominic barked, switching instantly into combat mode. Clearing pattern alpha. They moved as one, bursting into the second-floor corridor. Smoke billowed from below. 3 Russo hitmen, clad in tactical gear, were ascending the stairs. Arya dropped to one knee, firing instantly. 2 shots took the lead man in the chest, dropping him backward down the stairs. Dominic fired over her head, his shots precise and lethal, taking out the second man. The third man scrambled for cover behind a marble pillar, spraying wild suppression fire down the hallway. Bullets chipped the plaster around them. Flank him left, Arya shouted over the din. I'll draw his fire. Before Dominic could protest, she broke cover, sprinting across the hallway toward the opposite guest wing. The gunman leaned out to track her, eager for the kill. It was the opening Dominic needed. He stepped out and put a single round through the man's head. They moved down the stairs, stepping over bodies. The main foyer was a wreck of shattered chandeliers and overturned furniture. The heavy oak front doors were blown off their hinges. Through the smoke, a figure emerged at the entrance, Marco, the Russo capo who had been Arya's handler, the man who held the leash to her brother's life. He was surrounded by 4 more shooters. Siren, Marco sneered, seeing her beside Dominic. You disappoint me. The boy dies tonight because you couldn't keep your legs closed. The mention of Leo sent a glacial fury through Arya's veins that superseded all fear. She didn't wait for Dominic's command. She moved forward, a blur of lethal aggression. She engaged the 2 men on the left, her movements fluid and economical. She shot one in the kneecap, using his collapsing body as a shield to take out the second with a shot to the throat. Dominic roared, engaging the right flank, his fury matching hers. He was a juggernaut, using his physical size and rage to overwhelm the remaining gunmen. Arya came face to face with Marco. He raised his weapon, grinning fiercely. Stupid bitch. She dropped her empty Beretta, drawing the ceramic knife she always kept in her boot. She closed the distance before he could acquire the target, deflecting his gun arm upward. The shot went wild into the ceiling. With a primal cry, she drove the knife upward under his ribs, aiming for the heart. He gasped, his eyes widening in shock as the life drained out of him. That was for Leo, she hissed into his ear as he crumpled to the blood-slicked marble floor. Silence fell again, broken only by the crackle of small fires and the distant sound of approaching police sirens. It was over. The Russo strike team was decimated. Arya stood over Marco's body, breathing hard, her hands covered in blood that wasn't hers. She slowly turned to face Dominic. He was standing amidst the wreckage of his home, bleeding from a graze on his arm, looking at her across the expanse of the destroyed foyer. The look of utter betrayal was gone, replaced by a somber, heavy realization. He had seen her choose. He had seen her kill her own handler to protect him. He walked toward her slowly, holstering his weapon. He stopped inches from her, reaching out to take her bloodied hands in his. "Where is he?" Dominic asked, his voice rough with smoke and emotion. "Who?" Arya whispered, shaking from the adrenaline dump. "Your brother. Where are they holding him?" Arya felt tears prick her eyes for the first time in years. "A farmhouse outside Naples. Marco's phone will have the coordinates." Dominic nodded slowly. He pulled his own secure phone from his pocket and dialed a number. "It's me. I have a location near Naples, a farmhouse. Send the extraction team, top priority. There's a boy being held there." Get him out alive and burn the place to the ground. He ended the call and looked down at Arya. He's safe. My best men are on it. The Russos won't touch him again. A sob broke free from Arya's throat. She sagged against him, and he caught her, wrapping his arms around her tightly, pulling her into the solid warmth of his chest. You lied to me, Dominic murmured into her hair, the words lacking their previous venom. You betrayed my trust. In my world, that's a death sentence. I know, she mumbled against his torn shirt. But you also saved my life, twice tonight, and you chose me over your own handler when the bullets were flying. He pulled back slightly to look into her eyes, his expression intense and unyielding. That buys you a second chance, but only one, Arya. From this moment on, there are no more secrets. You belong to me body and soul, and I protect what's mine. It wasn't a gentle declaration of love. It was a territorial claim, a Mafia Don stating his terms of surrender. But looking into his dark, ravaged eyes, Arya saw the love beneath the steel. It was a dangerous, complicated love, forged in blood and fire, but it was real. I'm yours, she whispered, accepting the terms. The future wouldn't be easy. The Russos would retaliate, and Dominic still had an empire to reshape. But as they walked out onto the terrace together, watching the first gray light of dawn touch the domes of Rome, they stood as a united front. The Don and his assassin, a partnership more formidable than any army in Italy. And woe to anyone who tried to come between them.